We see right now a trend of opportunistic politicians and instrumental scientists spewing certain narratives that are trying to convince people to give up their power and sort of centralize AI power and using the confusion and fear to manipulate people. Governments can have powerful AI, but I think individuals should as well. As long as we maintain not too large of a gap between individuals and the government, we're much more fault tolerant to oppression.
Must we accelerate? Just asking questions. I'm Zach Weissmuller, Reason Senior Producer, joined by my co-host, Liz Wolfe, Reason Associate Editor, author of the Reason Roundup. Hey, Liz.
Hey, Zach.
You've probably heard of effective altruism, but how about effective accelerationism, or EAC? You claim to be building an artificial god in the human image. We're building the conduit for the thermodynamic God that created us. We are not the same. Those are the words of Based Beff Jezos, a pseudonymous X account devoted to spreading the EAC message far and wide, once described by venture capitalist Marc Andreessen as a patron saint of techno-optimism, and by its detractors as unhinged and absolutely toxic for the AI discourse. The man behind Based Beff Jezos was unmasked in Forbes magazine last December as Guillaume Verdon, a Google quantum computing engineer turned co-founder of the AI startup Extropic, which has received about $14 million in seed funding to develop a new kind of chip for running AI models. He joins us today to talk about effective accelerationism, the politics of artificial intelligence, and what his company is doing to make sure that artificial general intelligence, or AGI, arrives quickly and remains beyond the control of a single corporation or government. Guillaume, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Zach and Liz. Very happy to be here. Big fan of Reason, so it should be a good conversation.
Awesome. Happy to have you. And you co-authored a piece on your Substack titled "What the F is EAC?" And the F is censored by you, not me. We're a free speech platform, but I'm just reading the words. It opens by naming its adversary, degrowth, which you call central planning hopped up on scarcity mindset. So what the F is EAC?
Yeah, many people are asking. Originally, it started as just a philosophy and outlook on life, and it kind of grew from a grassroots movement online into this whole movement that's affected, policy, thinking of tech leaders throughout the world, and various people's lives at this point. Basically, it's a philosophy realizing that the universe really has a sort of selection process for every bit of information, including cultures, genetics, technologies, etc. And really, it's a first principles meta culture. So it's not a particular culture, it's a meta prescription to maintain freedom and variance, and to dynamism, to have a constantly adapting system that seeks to grow. Fundamentally, it's derived from some laws of physics, of out of equilibrium thermodynamics, similar laws that led to the rise of life itself from a soup of atoms, and applying that sort of principle to every bit of information in our civilization. So that's very super grand, but essentially the goal of EAC is to be the culture that maximizes the likelihood of growth of civilization as measured by our ascension on a scale of energy production and consumption called the Kardashev scale. So essentially that's by construction, that's what EAC is. But practically day to day, we have all sorts of issues we talk about, and that's usually what most people are interested in, beyond the philosophy and physics.
You've said before that you're building a conduit for the thermodynamic God that created us. I notice also that God is not capitalized there. What exactly do you mean here?
Yeah, so we have this sort of meta-ironic notion of the thermodynamic God that you're not sure if we're serious. You're not sure. We've been accused of being a a cult, so sometimes we lean into that and lean into the sort of religious imagery and so on. But for us, the thesis is that everything is undergoing this sort of evolution process according to out of equilibrium thermodynamics. So everything is being selected for its ability to confer whatever it's part of, an ability to grow. So, for example, cultures are being selected for, do they confer an advantage of fitness for the group, right? That's true at a religious level. That's true at a corporate level, right? Like if your company has a great culture, then your company grows and it succeeds. If it has terrible culture, your company dies. But it's true for just about everything. And to us, it is a sort of invisible hand. Some people call it the invisible hand of the market, but it's beyond the idea of just free markets. It's like free markets for everything. It is what is guiding sort of. It's almost like a generative model in a way. And the selective process is how we got here. It's how we got to being an advanced civilization. It's how life emerged. And so, it is a generative process that creates. To us, it is a form of a god. And in a way, we are being aware of that, spreading the message. And, this is the sort of thing we revere and want to protect, right? And it's sort of a, it's like, it's so scientific, it's almost dipping into religion, right? Like, and that's been my personal journey as well, sort of
What do you
trying
mean?
to.
So
Well,
scientific that you're dipping into religion?
well, it's like, I think people have a religion-shaped hole in their hearts, right? And I was a theoretical physicist originally. I was a quantum physicist, quantum cosmologist, then I did AI and quantum computers. And a lot of people are searching for meaning and searching for what does it all mean, and they're looking for answers in physics. And to me, EAC was a way to provide some of the answers, at least for how do we get here? How did life evolve? How did civilization get to be sophisticated? Why are free markets from first principles, so powerful at creating amazing things? And why sort of is freedom so fundamentally important for the advancement of civilization? And why should we protect it at all costs, right? And so, yeah. So yeah.
People sometimes talk about building the machine god, which I think is really interesting, and then you're talking about thermodynamic gods. What do you think, like, why is it that there's such a tendency to frame it in these godlike terms, and do you think that this, freaks sort of the lay people out?
I think that's kind of the point. We're kind of doing it in jest here. We kind of joke at our company. The tweet I was referring, the tweet you put up was actually referring to the computers we're building to some extent, and the culture we're building. So both EOC and Extropic. But with Extropic, we'll get into it. But we're applying these concepts from out of equilibrium thermodynamics to do. To create AI supercomputers, right? And so we're dipping into that. But I think a lot of scientists and engineers in our generation are motivated, beyond rationality to build these technologies, and to them, it's kind of yeah, it's almost a religious quest, I would say, and for me, it is as well. But I think people have to hack their own chemistry to be very motivated to work really long hours, and they find all sorts of mental hacks. And religion sort of evolved as a way to hack our own mindset to go through hardship. And I think a similar thing is emerging now in Silicon Valley, where people have these sort of neo-tech religions to motivate the troops, I guess, right? And so you can both be aware that it's like a cognitive tool, but you could still lean into it and have fun and leverage it, right?
Do you think the neo-tech religions are a good thing?
I would say so, right? Like the reason subcultures arise is because they have utility to the group. They have positive utility to the group, or the company that adopts it, to the person, to their growth and prosperity, right? And that's sort of the EAC thesis, is that, look, we don't know which culture is optimal, but we should maintain freedom across cultures, freedom across technology and modalities, ways to organize ourselves, so that we converge onto the best way to do things, or these several best ways to do things, have them always dynamically compete, but ultimately they're being selected for according to their utility to whatever substrate they're running on. for its fitness and growth. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
You mentioned, I mean, you frame it in a sort of inevitability, like you're talking about the thermodynamic laws of the universe. You mentioned the Kardashev scale. Could you just, without going into a full-on physics lesson,
Yeah.
explain to us why you see the emergence of AGI as inevitable given the properties of the universe?
Yeah, I mean, intelligence did arise from thermodynamics. Life did arise from thermodynamics. Really, matter is being selected for, um, you know, paths. Yeah, without going into too much physics, but essentially configurations of matter that are better at predicting the environment, capturing energy, using it strategically for further growth and survival. Those configurations of matter survive, and intelligence gives you an advantage at doing that because you can understand your environment, you can predict it, you can store energy in the environment, you can capture it, and you don't have as much surprise from the environment, so you don't just randomly die. So intelligence kind of evolved as a byproduct of thermodynamics, and in a way, I think artificial intelligence just confers a an advantage to any company, let's say that it adopts it, or any individual, their financial outcomes, and so it's being selected for, and so it's just a sort of selection, but at sort of a meta organism scale, not necessarily a genetic scale. So to me, it just seems like it confers an advantage for growth, and so over time, it's gonna replicate as a technology, and we're already seeing that. It's taken the world by storm over the last 2.5 years since we started the Yak movement and made all these predictions.
I wanna like not push back on that part per se, but I want you to sort of detail what you mean because I think in one sense it has taken the world by a storm, but in another sense there's been an awful lot of hype surrounding AI and the pursuit of AGI
Yep.
specifically, but it's not super clear to me from where I'm sitting now that sort of normal people who don't operate on Twitter in the realm of these types of ideas and these subcircles, it's not clear to me that they're actually beginning to use this to see massive productivity gains in their work to quite the degree claimed. Can you complicate this narrative for me? Like, am I totally wrong here? Am I missing something major? How is this being used right now?
Yeah. First of all, I don't like the term AGI for the current type of AI we're pursuing. It's human like AI or anthropomorphic AI. We're trying to, well, I'm not building anthropomorphic AI, but let's say OpenAI, Anthropic, and so on, XAI. They're trying to build human like intelligence, and I don't see why they won't necessarily succeed. They're getting closer over time. Um, of course, it is overhyped right now because they have to raise the money to build the supercomputers to train these systems. Um, I have a whole contrarian thesis on this, and I think things are going to hit a relative sort of wall, and we can get into that.
Wait, can you give it to me really fast?
Let's go.
Well, yeah, I
I
mean,
love a contrarian thesis. This is like my bread
okay,
and butter over here.
well, yeah, no, I think the current paradigm is sort of hitting a sort of soft ceiling, right? Like it's becoming far too expensive to train these systems. You have to build several nuclear reactors to power the supercomputers, and there's no like hard theoretical limit. It's just practically with the current paradigm of GPUs, it's just not energy efficient enough for us to practically scale these systems into the regimes we want. Of course, now there's this whole new narrative that they're going to scale instead of the training. They're scaling the thinking, the test time compute, so thinking at runtime. So when the AI is like thinking of its response, it's taking more time to do it. But to serve a billion customers, that's going to cost again a ton of energy and compute. And so there's a sort of bottleneck, and that's been the whole thesis of EAC, or one of the theses of EAC, that actually every system in the world is being selected for its ability to grow. From biology to corporations and so on, everything's competing. Nothing has taken over the world. No singleton entity has like taken over the world yet. Somehow it always runs into a problem acquiring more resources to keep growing, right? And so we're kind of seeing that with the AI companies. We're kind of seeing that with the models, and that was our prediction. Whereas the marketing departments of these companies were like, we're going to create a god that's going to destroy us, and we shall revere it, or whatever. And that was their sort of fear-based marketing. And we were kind of shorting that for like the last 2.5 years. But in reality, like, I'm very positive about, the impact of AI on our civilization. I just think it's going to be very hard. It's a technology that we constantly need to keep working hard on. It's not going to have a runaway effect that it just, once it reaches human-like intelligence, it's going to, self-improve in a runaway fashion. That's a fable, right? Like, and that's very egotistical from whoever comes up with that fable, because they think that, anything that's beyond their intelligence is like the singularity, right? And having worked, for 10 years on AI for physics, designing matter, designing drugs, designing proteins, and so on, and AI for quantum physics, I can tell you the world is far more complex than we think. There's not going to be a single sort of God model that understands the whole universe. And in fact, we're going to need to massively innovate at the hardware layer if we're going to reach the next stage of intelligence. And that's going to take, free markets, a lot of innovation, a lot of people being optimistic about the future, working really hard, having a supportive community of startups, and really innovating. And really that's kind of the priority for EAC has been making sure we have a healthy, innovative ecosystem that's going to innovate in a sustainable fashion and not sort of stall out in a local optimum of technology. And for that's why we've been pushing for sort of freedom, open source, deregulation, and having several startups at any one time pursuing every technology, so that we're constantly exploring the landscape of possibilities and not getting stuck in one way of thinking. And it's partly why been politically active in the shadows, trying to make sure regulation doesn't kill the AI startup dream.
You're swimming against the tide of a lot of the big players, especially. You mentioned, like, especially last year, about a year ago or last summer, there was this big push from OpenAI, from Google, a bunch of others, to say, we really need and want regulation. That has sort of died down a little bit now. Maybe with the changing of the administration coming up, there's going to be a different political approach. But there are still prominent voices out there who say that your approach, your way of thinking about it, is dangerous. One prime example is Geoffrey Hinton, often called the godfather of AI. He this year won the Nobel Prize for his work on neural networks. I have a clip of him talking about open source, which you are advocating, and what he sees as the danger. John, could we roll that clip for a second?
I think if you want regulations, the most important regulation would be to not open source big models. So I think open sourcing big models is like being able to buy nuclear weapons at Radio Shack. Do you guys still remember what Radio Shack was? Maybe not. It's crazy to open source these big models because bad actors can then fine tune them for all sorts of bad things. So in terms of regulations, I think that's probably the most important thing we can do right now.
Do you worry about that concern that you're just inevitably placing a very powerful weapon in a very bad person's hand by pursuing open source AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that, just like with guns, right? You have the Second Amendment, right? You can't have a centralized party have the monopoly on violence. I think if you have over centralization of AI in the hands of very few, you're going to have a sort of monopolization of the ability to coerce others, right? If you have a gap in intelligence, you can predict your opponent and you can steer them, right? And what does that look like? It could look like, centralized oligopoly, working with the government, and then they engineer psychological operations to steer people however they want, right? The answer to that is for everybody to own their own AI that they control. There's no government backdoors. There's no centralized backdoors. They own their hardware. They own the weights that they control. And then they can augment their own intelligence to sort of filter the information that's impeding upon them from the top down, right? And that's how we maintain freedom. That's how we maintain individuality. If we over centralize AI, we're going to lose our and we ban sort of individualized AI. We're going to become a Borg-like mind. Whoever controls the priors and the culture of the centralized AI, they have extreme power. They basically control a chunk of your brain. They control your effective thoughts. They control your source of truth, because people are going to externalize, just like they use Google search as their source of truth, they use the AIs. That, that would lead to dystopian nightmare. And so to me, I think it's not negotiable. It comes with risks for people to be more intelligent, but it also comes with massive upside, right? And the thesis about the advancement of civilization is if we have a sort of decentralized search for technologies and cultures and ways of being and so on, the more nodes we have searching the landscape in parallel, right, and the more capable they are, the more breakthroughs we're going to have, and the more we're all going to prosper. That's like the principle of sort of free markets. You don't do science in just one centralized lab. You have a free market searching for different ways of doing things and competing. And if we ban that, we're going to be severely hampering our innovation velocity, and we're going to be not fault tolerant to corruption and subversion of the control nodes of those AIs, right? Like if you have too much power that's concentrated, even if that, the people in charge at a given moment are supposedly benevolent, on a sufficient timescale, those nodes become corrupted because they become a target, right? And to me, like IAC or philosophy is like, we want to do whatever's best for scaling of civilization on a sort of long time scale, and fault tolerance to corruption and sort of collapse to authoritarianism and so on is like one of the priorities. And we see right now a trend of sort of opportunistic politicians and instrumental scientists spewing certain narratives that are trying to convince people to give up their power and sort of centralized AI power, and using the confusion and fear to manipulate people. And we're just trying to wake people up. All due respect to Geoffrey Hinton, I think I think in a way he's trying to confess to take credit for the sin. I think he back propagation and neural networks are kind of his creation, and it's like, what have I done? And he's having this sort of melodramatic moment, but realistically, you talk to people, a big risk they talk about is like bio risk, and you talk to people in biotech, they can barely get value out of the current models to create drugs, not engineer bad things, but engineer good things. So and people in enterprise, like you said, it's just barely starting to be useful, right? So it's not at the point where we need to shut it all down and stop innovating and kill the project, which is what some people in the pause AI or stop AI camp are saying. I think there's huge, immense upside we'd be leaving on the table if we stopped AI progress now out of sheer panic and anxiety. And realistically, there will be some subculture in the world on a sufficient timescale, even if we stop now, that would create AI because it has too much upside, and the culture that creates the AIs and scales it will just be dominant as a country, as a nation, as a corporation, whatever, compared to the ones that have stopped it. And so by construction, it's pointless to try to stop it, right? Yeah.
The Hinton soundbite is, I think, kind of funny, right? Because it presupposes that there are good actors and bad actors, and that it is especially, that it's clear cut, but also that the people who are building the existing AI that we are, operating off of are the good actors, right? Which you could make that case, but I'm not sure that I necessarily, for example, like trust the company OpenAI, given some of the turmoil that they experienced over the last year and the degree to which there may or may not have been consistently candid communications from certain people there, as well as, there's been a lot of internal turmoil and lots of the top people exiting to start their own companies or to attempt to sound the alarm about different things that they think were incorrect. And even all of that aside, regardless of whether or not you believe some of the people designing these LLMs are good or bad actors, there's also this question of what types of values are being enshrined in these models. I just think the hidden soundbite's a little bit amusing, and I'm curious about what you think, because it just acts as if it's so clearly good actors, bad actors, and it's not totally apparent to me that that is necessarily the case, or that Hinton should be the one who decides that, or that there's any one person who really gets to decide that.
There's just been a lot of like, AI is coming. It's gonna be really powerful. Trust me. You don't want it. You don't want to be in control of this. You can't trust yourself with this. Put us in charge. Put me and my friends in charge. We'll run it. You'll be safe. Trust us. I don't know. It's just and frankly, the thing that happens in for example, the Bay Area is you have these effective altruists and these rationalists, which are really high IQ people that don't understand game theory, manipulation, or sociopathy or whatever, and they get manipulated in being instrumental mouthpieces for people that are seeking power. And we've just called that out for 2.5 years as what's happening. And I look, I think again, they mean well, right? But really, they're just being instrumental for sort of overconcentration of power, which really leads to really bad outcomes. It's suboptimal for everyone. It's not fault tolerant to corruption again, and leads to worse products. I think right now, AI is sort of struggling to monetize. I think the investment on the if you look at how much is being invested in GPUs and infrastructure versus how much revenue is being pulled from the market, there's a big gap there. It's pretty significant, right? These companies are not yet super profitable, and so I think a different strategy is like, well, if we just get the government to subsidize this project and put us in charge, then we'll get to keep the project going, right? Rather than having to compete in the market.
But let me raise another aspect of it, because you're offering a very cynical explanation, and perhaps that is the correct explanation. But another line of argumentation that I've heard from Hinton and others is that it's not even going to be a nefarious actor trying to release some sort of AI weapon. It's that the AI will get beyond our control. It will, just as it becomes smarter, it will outsmart humans, and it will get out into the wild, and it will just autonomously will have the Skynet nightmare scenario. Do you take that serious? And so what follows from that is that, therefore, especially for these large models where there's so much computing power going into them, those are the ones that need to be very closely monitored, and we need to be making sure every step of the way that it's not in danger of, quote unquote, escaping. How seriously do you take that concern?
I mean, I think I think the safest scenario forward is, again, for there to be not too much of a gap in capabilities between the AIs that people have and the sort of AIs that maybe some certain other parties have. I think if there's a huge gap in capabilities, then it's tough to track and control AI. But in general, I think the way you get to the worst outcome is if you centralize AI, you make it closed source, and then you have research for several years with unlimited budget, and then you have an AI that's far more intelligent than its peers and can then manipulate even other AIs trying to keep it in check. I think, to me, I'm more worried about power-seeking
So,
humans.
in other words, to keep with the Second Amendment analogy,
Yeah,
the only way to stop a bad AI is with a good AI, something along those
yeah, to
lines.
some extent, but I don't see, like, I think AIs can be aligned to whatever parties they're part of, right? Like right now, the free market will not naturally produce nefarious, unaligned AI. My thesis is that there's a selective pressure right now in the space of models, right? Like if you think of a model being alive if it's being run on a cloud somewhere, and dead if it's not being run, then there's a selective pressure on AIs that are sort of subservient, that do what you tell them to do, that are easy to interpret. And in a way, we're steering the evolution of AI through the hand of the market towards alignment towards human preferences, just like we steered the evolution of wolves to dogs, right? To be our best friends, right? And so, does that mean there will never be a sort of AI that's engineered to be nefarious and autonomous? I mean, I can't prove it's never going to happen, but if we have a lot of really powerful good AIs that are going to align to our interests, then that sort of nefarious AI, were it to ever arise, would have a swarm of similar capability AIs that are aligned with us, taking it down. And so it's kind of adversarial equilibrium, right? It's kind of a escalation, and that's what you want. What you don't want is sort of there to be a ban on people owning their own AIs and being able to align AIs to their own interests, and always deferring to centralized parties' interests for how the AI should be aligned. That leads to really bad outcomes.
I want to ask you, we're going to move on to what you are doing practically to try to make this more decentralized future happen with Extropic. But I think it is worth really fleshing out your philosophy and your influence, is because, I mean, these are powerful tools. And so what people believe about them really matters. And one person that you've cited in the past is Nick Land as an influence. He's an odd figure with views that we don't have to defend in full, but I am really curious about this clip of him that you posted last year from the Beff Jezos account. Let's roll that.
There is a very similar pattern that you find in the structure of societies, in the structure of companies, and in the structure of computers. And all three are moving in the same direction. That is, away from a top-down structure of a central command system giving the system instructions about how to behave, towards a system that is parallel, that is flat, which is a web, and which change moves from the bottom up. And this is going to happen across all institutions and technical devices. It's the way they work.
So this was from 1994, so fairly prescient in terms of predicting how many technologies have actually played out. But how does Land's view of technological acceleration inform your work?
Yeah, so I would say there's three big things have contributed technologically over my life so far. One, and the three are sort of related to this principle of sort of bottom-up emergent programming of complex systems, right? So one was differentiable programming on quantum computers. It's basically bringing sort of AI-like programming, right? Gradient descent. You let, basically what happened over the last 10 years or so is that a lot of software went from imperative programming, if then else, right? Here's some logic. I am prescribing you, it's kind of very authoritarian, like you will do exactly what I said, Mr. Computer. And now it's more like you let the computer optimize itself to find the program to execute for you, and you're kind of just, it's sort of, chief economist or something. You tune like one hyperparameter, the learning rate, which is more or less like an interest rate or something, and then you don't touch anything else, and you let it cook. You let it gradient descent and optimize itself. So we went from sort of top-down prescriptive programming, software 1.0, to software 2.0, where gradient descent is a better programmer than you. And so that's the sort of philosophy I brought to quantum computing. And at Aid Quantum Computing, that was my career at Google before, leaving. And then I thought, could we bring that philosophy to, could we bring that sort of thinking to culture, what would a self-organizing culture and self-optimizing culture look like? And that was EAC. Really, all we're prescribing is like optimize culture to maximize growth on the Kardashev scale, and constantly mutate, constantly optimize. And then the third part is, because software 2.0 is eating the world of software, maybe we need a new type of computer, right, to go with it, right? That instead of, being fully stiff and logical and deterministic and programmed imperatively, is actually self-organizing and is very much inspired by these sort of self-organizing algorithms and what is called differentiable programming. And so that led to, building thermodynamic computers and founding Extropic, which is what I'm working on today. I can go into a whole rabbit hole there, but essentially we're trying to bring that philosophy to hardware and take inspiration from the physics of biology, the physics of life, which is really out of equilibrium thermodynamics, to design sort of bio-inspired electronics where the computer is not deterministic. It's not in a state that you can definitely know, and it's also optimizing itself in the sense that it's just has these parameters and you tune them with gradient descent. You don't quite know what it's doing, but it's doing something, and then you see the results, right? And you can optimize that. And so I think the pattern here is that it's a new way of thinking that can change just about every facet of our society, where instead of having very sort of top-down, imperative, logical, stiff control over all sorts of complex systems, we kind of let them optimize themselves. And to me, I think like educating the world on the power of self-adaptive complex systems is really a key imperative, because it has benefits to culture, policy, technology, and so on. But fundamentally, to me, it's been the main disadvantage libertarians have versus sort of authoritarians. Authoritarians are like, put me in power. Here is the outcome I want, and here is how I'm going to control the system to get it there. And they can convince the public of a first order model of where things are going, and then they overcorrect it, and then their actions actually have nth order effects, because it's such a complex system that they didn't predict. And then they don't, they deflect the blame. Oh, the system was too complex. I couldn't predict how my policies would backfire.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the part of the concern among the political class right now is that these systems that you are developing might not happen, that would push things more towards decentralization might not happen in time, and that the real arms race is going to happen between the major world powers, between the US and China. There was this paper from a former member of OpenAI's super alignment team. His name was Leopold Aschenbrenner, and it circulated earlier this year. It was shared by Ivanka Trump, so that says something about whose eyes it's getting in front of. But he claimed that we're on a trajectory to hit the intelligence and capability of an AI researcher or engineer by 2028. I think I have that graph here. So you can see that the end of that there is once AI, the reason that's an important inflection point in his telling is that then the AI is there. It can self-improve. It can just keep tweaking itself, and presumably we might have takeoff or something at that point. How close do you think we are to that kind of inflection point?
I just don't believe in that sort of inflection point. I think in general, even if you have more researchers right now in AI, it's not necessarily helpful, right? Like if it was helpful, they would just hire more researchers. Right now, the headcounts of the labs are not that big for the market caps they have, frankly. In reality, it's just compute, right? You could include the model that's the AI researcher that's searching over hyperparameter space, which is the parameter space of architectures, as part of a bigger model. You could just chunk it all. Okay, now it's a bigger model. How much compute does that take, right? And realistically, if you just trained a model with the same amount of compute, you'd probably get similar performance to the total amount of compute you had to put into that. So really, we're bottlenecked by compute, which is again bottlenecked by thermodynamics. You need some either nuclear reactors or some oil to power this optimization, and there's not an infinite amount of that, right? So I think we're suffering from sort of I guess I call it like the SF laptop hacker syndrome, right? Someone in a cafe on their MacBook, and their MacBook Air, and then they're firing up 20,000 GPUs that they don't feel it viscerally, don't feel the heat, they don't feel how much effort had to go into building that supercomputer. And to them, they could just change a zero with a keystroke and use more GPUs. And so from an abstract standpoint, they could arbitrarily scale their systems, but in practice, they just can't, right? Now, is scaling GPU-based AI, paramount to, the next, dominance of the US for the next few years? Probably, but is there going to be a threshold of sort of runaway AI? I don't think so. I think it's going to come down to sort of more traditional might. Do we have the supply chains? Do we have the chips? Do we have the supercomputing infrastructures? Do we have the energy? And again, it goes back to my thesis of we should scale our energy production, right? We should scale the Kardashev scale, and it doesn't have to be just at the civilization level. It could be at the United States level, because that's kind of the golden metric that can't be gamed. So I would say I agree in some ways with Leopold that we should accelerate because our opponents they will try to beat us in every way they can. But is scaling up the current day paradigm and putting, I don't know, $1 trillion towards scaling up a cluster the way to go? I personally don't think so. I think the government should back alternative efforts to, forms of alternative computing. Of course, I'm an entrant in this, but I've seen enough, being in physics-based AI and physics-based computing for 10 years, that there are other substrates that are far superior to GPUs and really just need the capital to have enough engineers to scale them up. And if the government really wanted to win the AI race, that's what they'd be investing in. Yeah.
People talk about alignment an awful lot. Is there an alignment problem in your view?
I think
does this even exist at all, or is it just a buzzy thing that people like to talk about because it makes them feel better?
So, a lot of these people that work in these AI labs on alignment and so on, I used to be a theoretical physicist, in string theory and holography and ADS-CFT and so on. There's a lot of people back then that there was a sort of fork in physics where you could try to reduce every system to a few equations and feel like the humans can understand these systems in physics. And that was sort of doomed, and that's why we stalled in physics. And there was a pivot towards sort of complexism. It's like, actually, we can't understand emergent properties of these systems, but we can throw compute at them and not worry too much about it. I think the same is true for deep learning. I think people obsessing over interpretability and sort of alignment is them trying to have top-down control over a complex system they barely understand and trying to cling on to a sense of control. And it's kind of a moot point there. I think, these systems, they're going to do what their selective pressure guides them to do, and they're going to do what we optimize them for. But it's basically impossible to predict what they're going to do in every situation. That's like a combinatorially hard thing to do. And so it's kind of pointless. But, there's this whole cottage industry of philosophers and pseudo mathematicians that are trying to maintain their jobs, exploring this stuff. No, to be honest, there's some reliability engineers that are really needed, but there's just a sort of parasitic class on top of that are really kind of mini think tanks within these AI orgs trying to write various random things up so that it can affect policy towards favoring the big labs. I think that's what a lot of the alignment people are. Anyways,
Can you describe just really briefly for our audience, because I realize we should have led with this, what exactly is alignment? What is this cottage industry of people troubling themselves with?
Good question. I think they're still defining it, right? Isn't that wonderful? But alignment is just kind of ensuring that AI is aligned with sort of its pilot's intent, or I guess like the maker's intent and the individual user's intent.
Hmm.
And that's very difficult because we can't always verbalize our intent, and even if we can verbalize it, it won't always follow it. And so, very famously, I think, people jailbreak these systems and they go beyond sort of the programmed imperative, meant to align these systems, for example, to not infringe on copyright or to not say certain things. And to me, it just shows that like these efforts, they've been useful to some extent, but they're never going to be able. It's like, have we solved human alignment? Right. Or seriously, we haven't, right? And we're fine, right? And how do we ensure we're fine? There's sort of this adversarial equilibrium of like, okay, well, maybe this party has this interest, this party that has this interest, and they all compete to steer other systems towards their interests, and that's okay, and that's good actually, and that's sort of free marketplace of ideas, and we want to maintain that. And so to me, I think right now there's a tendency towards, again, centralized compute. Few people get to prescribe what the AI is aligned to, what values it's aligned to, and that's not good. What we want to enable is a future where compute is far more energy efficient. You can have basically what is today an AI supercomputer, in your desktop at home, in your power outlet, and that's when we're going to really decentralize AI, and everybody's going to have a personalized extension of their cognition, that they own and they control, and not some centralized entity or some government. Because again, like there's a reason we have individuality, and it's important. We have to search over the space of ideas constantly in a parallel way, and not a centralized way. And so, if we're gonna if everybody's gonna augment their cognition with artificial intelligence, we need to have, sort of decentralized AI, decentralized ownership of AI systems. So from the weights to the data to the compute. Yeah.
I want to bring us to a clip of former Google CEO Eric Schmidt talking on Scott Galloway's show about the arms race in terms of AGI and AI development overall between the United States and China. And could we play that, John? Do you have that queued up?
This week, there were two libraries from China that were released, open source. One is a problem solver that's very powerful, and another one is a large language model that's equal, and in some cases exceeds the one from Meta, with which they use every day. It's called Llama 3, 400 billion. I was shocked when I read this because I had assumed that in my conversation with the Chinese, that they were 2 to 3 years late. It looks to me like it's within a year now. So it'd be fair to say it's the US and then China within a year's time. Everyone else is well behind. Now, I'm not suggesting that China will launch a rogue attack against an American city, but I am alleging that it's possible that a third party could steal from China because it's open source, or from the US if they're malevolent, and do that. So the threat escalation matrix goes up with every improvement.
I mean, China's open source. Are they doing it all right?
I mean, it's funny that, we've had these big debates and regulatory risks now hanging over the open source ecosystem in the US, and China's just plowing forward. The reality is that having sort of open source AI allows people to sort of mutate the models in hyperparameter space, and that costs far less than training a model from scratch, and that encourages a sort of open innovation and ecosystem, and many more players to contribute to improving AI technologies. And really, our main advantage in the United States versus China is the fact that we have free markets, we have freedom of speech, freedom of thought. We can have many companies pursuing something rather than just one centralized government effort. And open source is a key part of that, of supporting sort of the US innovation ecosystem, which is really our moat. Our moat is speed. It can't just be secrecy and IP. That has not worked for the past several decades. Every key piece of technology we've had, or most of them, have been exfiltrated and copied by China. This was the case, unfortunately, in quantum computing, the world I came from. It's probably the case in AI. And so at that point, if our mode is speed, speed of innovation, if you think of the free market as a sort of evolutionary search algorithm over the space of technologies, then the speed at which it traverses the landscape of technologies is sort of proportional to its variance. So how much, the more we mess around, the more we find out, right? And so,
Yeah.
so you need to have many players, and you need to have the freedom to have many players participate in AI research. And if you close down the ability to do open source, that'd be really bad. And it's funny that China is kind of beating us on this aspect. That's fairly recent. Who knows? Maybe Meta releases
Yeah.
a new model in like a few months.
There's something very strange about China sort of out open sourcing us. And in that same Aschenbrenner paper we talked about earlier, he's projecting that in like 1 to 2 years, China is also just going to steal a bunch of data from all the major labs because there's like very low security in these labs. What is at stake? What you said you sort of you think the China threats might be somewhat overrated, but what do you see as at stake if, say, the CCP outpaces the United States in AI development?
Yeah, I mean that'd be really bad. We have to keep up. We have to set the pace and stay in the lead. Of course, we're all familiar with Thucydides' trap, right? When an ascending power challenges an incumbent power, the world becomes more unstable, and intelligence is power, right? It's, if you have predictive power over the future, it gives you a lot of optionality with what you want to do, right? Do I think that these anthropomorphic models running on GPUs are like the ultimate source of power for a nation? No, I think there's all sorts of other aspects to being a powerful nation, and establishing dominance over your enemies. But I think, yeah, I think right now there's a sort of main character syndrome with some of these AI companies. They're like,
Who are you referring to specifically?
just the whole current batch, all of them. They're like, they're all thinking they're gonna hit this threshold, right? They just got to rush to this threshold of the singularity or human-like AI, and then there's gonna be a runaway effect. Their job is done. They can just sit back, and we've won. But in reality, nothing in nature is like this. It's going to be a constant grind uphill. It's going to be a constant battle. So even once we've scaled this current tech tree of GPUs powered by nuclear reactors running transformers to its limits, there's going to be a new tech tree that then we have to scale, and we need to beat our competitors too. So, yes, I'm for accelerating current developments in AI, but I think there's sort of a lot of hyperbolic writing, including Leopold's writing, that I think is passable. But the sentiment is correct that these labs kind of probably have effectively security theater for their operational security. You could just assume that trade secrets leak on a 1 to 2 year timescale max. And so we do need to maintain a good pace of innovation, but I don't think that just having one centralized effort that's government backed is the way to win this race. By the very nature of AI, it's a high dimensional optimization problem. There's not always just a clear direction to go. And so having sort of an innovation ecosystem where many players can take part and have the resources is provably better than just having one research lab that is going to test. They're going to pool all resources to test one thesis of how to train these things, and then it either goes all the way or fails, and then what, right? But if you have several, then you're actually fault tolerant, and on average you find new ways to run these models better and achieve better performance. And so I think I like the sentiment that we need to, maintain innovation speed. That's the whole thing about EAC. That's all, it's what we talk about with acceleration. But I don't think it's like, it's a pivot from sort of religious, AI singularity panic to China panic. It's kind of a pivot, again, instrumental for centralization and regulatory capture. And I think that, that's a recent pivot I haven't really dealt with as much on my Twitter, but I guess we're talking about it here. I still think the free market, with maybe some support and some, government subsidies, or I don't know, government funds, would win versus a centralized effort where they maybe just plow $1 trillion into a bunch of scientists and GPU clusters. So I think that's what that essay is trying to engineer, right? It's like, put me and my friends in charge of the government cluster in Manhattan Project, please. Look how smart we are. So
It
anyways.
seems like you're talking sort of obliquely when you refer to people with main character syndrome about Sam Altman, the OpenAI co-founder, the person currently running it. And this is a company that I think is quite interesting, right? Because for many people, ChatGPT is sort of the brand name that they're most familiar with. They might not know LLM specifically, but they know ChatGPT. It's been very successful. But OpenAI in particular is quite interesting because Sam Altman basically survived an attempted coup. Um, and I believe that that was last Thanksgiving. And then there have been a lot of really high profile exits from the company. There's Ilya who left, there's Mira Murati. A lot of these have taken people at the company by surprise. And then most recently, OpenAI had long operated as a nonprofit and now has transitioned to a for-profit. They used to have a bunch of boilerplate language about how it was, because they were interested not in profit, but in the good of humanity. And now they've really changed their tune. What do you think is happening here?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a yeah. So I used to be, critical of Sam when he was trying to centralize control of AI and so on. I think right now he's just trying to have a company with a good product that survives and scales, which every CEO should be doing. Of course, if it was a for-profit company from the get-go, that would have been cleaner. But now he's trying to rectify things. I think actually, Anthropic is sort of worse now. They're in terms of their narrative. They're all about, they're more inclined towards the AI safety sort of cult, right? This sort of cult of like controlling things from the top down. Oh, we're gonna be the shepherds of this new sacred being and so on. And sort of the what you've seen is actually a migration of the AI safety cult away from OpenAI. That's become more like a corporation. As any company should, to survive at some point. You got to align your incentives with the market and growth incentives, or die. And Anthropic kind of still has that sort of reality distortion field, and sort of, oh, we're the responsible ones, and so on. And same for, safe superintelligence and whatnot, right? But sometimes the thing that's funny to me is like some people use the pretext that they want, they're doing it for AI safety, and they thought OpenAI was being unsafe or whatever, but really they're doing it for financial upside, right? And founding your own company is much more lucrative than being the nth employee. And going to Anthropic when it has a comparable product to OpenAI and the valuation is not as high, then it's kind of market arbitrage, right? And so the talent flux you've seen is kind of just price equilibration between two companies of similar capabilities. But Sam Altman has a lot of heat right now, but I would say, Dario and the others are kind of all in a similar camp of trying to centralize control and trying to sort of probably achieve regulatory capture. Yeah.
I'm
But
curious
I don't know,
how.
Bonnie, if that explains the whole attempted coup thing for which there were never really answers given, right?
Yeah. I mean, the narrative we had was that it was like EAs versus EAC. And the EAs thought Sam wasn't concerned enough about AI safety, and Sam just wanted to accelerate and scale the company.
Is that true? I mean,
I don't
I
know.
saw he tweeted that you can't out accelerate him.
Well,
So
you found
maybe
some
he's a
great
secret EAC.
Great classics. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Sam just wants to accelerate OpenAI and make it the biggest company,
Hmm.
and you can't blame him for that in a way. Like, he's just playing the game, right? And as long as like he doesn't convince the world to like give up on every other AI effort and just give him all the money, I think things are fine. As long as competition is legal, as long as we have XAI, Anthropic, all these other players, Meta, that are allowed to compete with them. Again, they won't have too much power. They won't have a monopoly on talent. They won't have a monopoly on compute. They want a monopoly on data. And so it won't be a sort of runaway AI that takes over the world, because there's gonna be like four other
Yeah.
competitors, right? And that's the beauty of capitalism, man. Like it
Well,
just is
but
very fault tolerant.
also so much of his public persona, so much of his image for the last few years has been like, I'm the good guy, like, I'm not like other girls type thing. And now he's completely changed course, and that narrative has been entirely complicated. And the switch from nonprofit to for profit sort of raises the question of like, well, if you were nonprofit because you cared about the good of humanity before, like, well, what the fuck? Do you not anymore?
Oh yeah,
Like
no, like we were calling
there's a
it out 2.5
certain
years ago that
sliminess
it
that
was a
I think
facade,
people
right?
can rightfully sort of latch onto and
Yeah,
say, "Well, what's going on here?"
yeah, no, it was a facade, right? It was an instrumental belief, right? Just like, I mean, a lot of cultures and beliefs like evolve through this mimetic selection I was talking about instrumentally, right? And it was
Hmm.
an instrumental culture to get people to quit their jobs and work in AI for many years. But now they don't need that as much, because just the good old financial incentives of financial upsides aligns people, and they can get all
Right.
sorts of talent that just wants to make a bunch of money in AI right now. So you don't
Well,
need to be part of that cult that's not necessarily aligned with shareholder interests.
yeah, I'm curious how you think that will play out over the next few years. Now that we're having a changing of the guard, like how is the current regulatory environment looking in terms of the prospects for EAC? I mean, there's this big bill in California which was vetoed. I'm bringing up the veto
Mm.
statement that was signed by Gavin Newsom, who said, I'm returning Senate Bill 1047 without my signature. It would have required developers of large AI models and those providing the computing power to train such models to put certain safeguards and policies in place to prevent catastrophic harm. And it would have established a state entity to oversee that. Sounds like exactly the kind of thing that you are terrified of in happening in California. And Gavin Newsom said no. His reasons were kind of interesting. He said by focusing on only the most expensive and large scale models, it establishes a framework that could give the public a false sense of security about controlling this fast moving technology. Smaller specialized models, I'm looking at you, Gil, might emerge as equally or even more dangerous than the models targeted by SB 1047. So he kind of vetoed it because it was not comprehensive enough in his telling. So there's that aspect. That was a big deal in AI policy, given that
Yeah.
California is where a lot of the action's happening. The Trump administration is tight with Elon Musk, who in the past has been a big AI safety warrior, but also doesn't like regulation. So I don't know.
A
How
little
does the
cognitive
current
dissonance
political
there.
landscape look? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm very aligned with Elon on a lot of values, and I think he's, openly a fan of EOC and the principles of scaling the Kardashev scale and so on. We do disagree on, AI regulation to some extent. I think,
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't exactly understand his position, given how staunchly anti-paperwork, anti-regulation he's been. I mean, he's in charge of Doge right now, and
Right.
yet he has this sort of opposite sort of yeah, just cognitively dissonant thinking when it comes to AI. Um, I yeah, I am worried for California laws, because right now, they're gonna they could screw a lot of things up. But at a national level, we'll see how it plays out, right? At the same time, we also have Marc Andreessen and so on, who's close to the administration and was a big proponent for it. Was just on Joe Rogan, sort of doing a victory lap a couple days ago.
Hmm.
And Andreessen Horowitz has been a huge proponent for open source and little tech, right? So I think it's just a classic lobbying of little tech versus big tech. Big tech wants to, freeze freeze the game, and little tech wants to keep things dynamic so that new up and comers can rise up and disrupt things. So we'll see how it plays out. I do have my hopes that at a national level, it's going to be far more libertarian than it would have been with the alternative administration, which it seems it was converging onto a government-backed oligopoly, which would have been really bad. And that would have led to, honestly, a dystopian nightmare where people have Borg-like intelligence that's prescribed from the top down, and people don't even control sources of truth and culture. But yeah, to me, I think regulation for AI right now, there's no real upside. There's no real upside. It's all risk. It's all risk that the sort of this connective tissue between the government and your models gets abused, and by those in power, or if it's a hardware backdoor, it could be a hacker or whatever. I think there's a lot more risks than upside here to giving regulatory power over models, and I honestly don't understand the upside. So yeah.
And I've got to say, with regards to California, I think the real subtext of Gavin Newsom's veto is just that he's terrified of the industry fleeing, like so many other industries have. I mean, I know your company's kind of split between California and Boston. Is that right? Elon Musk has obviously been willing to pull out of there, and with Tesla. So that's a real danger for state level, or a real check on state level overreach. And hopefully you're right that there will be an appropriately light touch approach at the federal level. I do want to bring us to your company, Extropic, because I would love for you to lay out what it is that you are doing to try to bring forth this decentralized AI future that you've advocated for during this conversation. I was reading through some of your literature, and you note that Moore's law, which is the famous law that shows that the number of transistors on microchips doubles every 2 years. It's basically, the chips get smaller. You can fit more and more on a smaller and smaller chip. There's a sort of a consensus in the industry, or an emerging consensus, that that's kind of flattening out. And your idea is that we need that, something's got to be, you got to figure something else out to, account for that if you want to start scaling up AI. There's also the energy problems that you've been mentioning. There's been lots of news of the big tech companies. Here we've got one: Microsoft, Google, and Amazon turning to nuclear energy to fuel the AI boom. So that's a thing. But your idea seems to be, can we figure out a way to not have to consume so much energy to make this happen? You've designed a new kind of clip, or new kind of chip that you've described earlier as sort of being inspired by biology. I'm going to just put up an image of that along with some B-roll of your lab as you explain to us what this is and how it's different than what else is out there on the market.
Yeah. I mean, so there's problems for centralized AI and there's problems for decentralized AI. Decentralized AI, it's just really hard to have enough compute in one node in your house right now. You can't have a brain-like AI computer, on your desktop, right? And so for you to have an extension of your own cognition that you own and control, it's currently impossible, right? You would need to own a piece of land with a huge cloud and run your models on it, or a massive cluster. And so it's not tractable with today's compute. And there's people working on decentralized AI software, but they're still, decentralizing between clouds. It's still not, individual ownership. So densification of intelligence from a footprint and power perspective is kind of the bottleneck to sort of individualized and individually owned AI. So that's one reason we're doing what we're doing. Another one, as you mentioned, is that nuclear powered is required at this point to scale the supercomputers for centralized AI. And it's getting ridiculous, right? There's like 3 or 4 nuclear power plants per cluster, and that can't keep scaling exponentially, right? So something has to change. We got to change the substrate of intelligence, right, at the sort of the atomic level. Now, if you try to scale down current day compute, right now it's computers are digital and classical, so they're deterministic. You have each transistor is either definitely on or definitely off. And when things get fuzzy, because you go to too low power, too high temperature, if you overheat your computer, it crashes, right? It's not very fault tolerant, right? It's not used to randomness in the computation. It's not designed for that. We can go to way lower power and make transistors smaller if we allow for randomness to happen at a component level, right? And that's the way forward to keep scaling Moore's law. And Moore's law is like the most important thing you could be working on because it powers so much of innovation and prosperity in our world, right? So it's kind of the most EAC thing to work on is to solve the scaling of Moore's law. And we see an opportunity with sort of most compute workloads becoming focused on AI to build a computer that is doing these algorithms that are really stochastic. They're very sort of random and probabilistic, and do them in hardware that's also probabilistic, right? So instead of having these algorithms that you're trying to represent a probability distribution that represents your data, and then you compile it to a deterministic computer. It's very stiff and it has all these stiff logical operations, and then back to very deterministic hardware that you pay a big price energetically to maintain its determinism. You would just run the algorithms that are fuzzy directly in sort of fuzzy or lo-fi, low-power hardware. And this is actually how our brains work. It's actually how a lot of biology works. And instead of like being obsessed with biomimicry and the analogy we use is like making a plane that flaps its wings, you just understand the principles that nature has figured out how to harness, and you harness those directly. So for us, it's sort of stochastic physics. So it just means like evolutions that have some randomness but some pattern to them, right? And how do you guide that sort of random evolution to do a certain algorithm? That's what we're building. So we started off with superconductors, which is this kind of room-sized cryo-cooled computer. That was our first science experiment.
Is that what this is right here?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So they're actually what we're gonna, we're writing up the papers on this right now. But what we demonstrated is going from quantum behavior to thermodynamic, right? So the different regimes of physics. But our next chip that we started manufacturing is actually in silicon. It's mass scale manufacturable, and it runs at room temperature, which most people thought it would take us 10 years, but we did it in 10 months, right?
I mean, that's been like, hasn't that been a white whale of engineering forever? Like a room temperature, and you're saying you've actually...
No, it's not a room temperature superconductor. It's not.
Okay.
That's not. So it's just a room temperature thermodynamic computer.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
So we had to take the principles we learned and how to program, like how we program superconductors, but map that in a different way to electron physics happening at ultra low power in silicon. Because again, like if your product can't scale and can't scale to the world in terms of manufacturing, there's no point in building it. It's just science, right? And we are a startup company, not a science lab. So
is it fair to say you're actually moving from digital to analog to make this happen? Like the future of AI is actually analog?
It's analog stochastic, so it's even further. Well, analog's always slightly stochastic, but most people say it isn't, and that's where the problem lies. But we take into account and model all the randomness of the jitter of electrons that happens in analog systems, and we use it. We use it as part of the algorithm instead of having to constantly filter it out, right? And that's the key, right? Because filtering, pumping out that noise, you're pumping out entropy, you're pumping out heat. It costs you energy, right? That's cooling. So our computers exhaust far less heat, right? And so for us as well, talking about global geopolitics, it's an opportunity to figure out how to manufacture the most cutting edge AI chips by far in the US, because it's a different way to use manufacturing processes entirely. It's a different way to embed the problem. And so, what we've been working on has been to make sure we're not over reliant on foreign supply chains for the future of AI in the U.S. And to me, it's kind of why I kind of sometimes I trivialize sort of the main character syndrome that these pure algorithm startups have. They don't understand how much overhang there is at the hardware level, and what we've seen privately in our labs. And I think it's going to be a marathon, not just a sprint for a couple years. I think right now a lot of people have interest in engineering this narrative that there should be a 3-year sprint. They should be put in charge, and then we'll see after that. I think it's going to be an ongoing thing. It's going to be forever an arms race of artificial intelligence. But to me, it's clear that the governments, want to maintain control and want to maintain whatever national supremacy. They're gonna accelerate centralized efforts. I don't think they need too much of an edge there. They're naturally going to do that out of self-interest. I think what I'm most worried about is sort of governments convincing people that they shouldn't own AI. They should be scared of it. They shouldn't own it. They shouldn't control it. And they should just give away the right to control AI. As governments can have powerful AI, but I think individuals should as well. And as long as we maintain not too large of a gap between individuals and the government, we sort of we're much more fault tolerant to oppression. And hopefully this resonates with sort of the Reason audience, which I guess leans libertarian. So yeah.
Right now, I think most people are really watching the chip producers out there, NVIDIA and TSMC. And there's been definitely a concerted interest in the last few years in sort of shoring up American manufacturing of chips, specifically out of concern that what happens if China seizes Taiwan, for example. In a sense, you're saying all of this and the possible tariffs that will be imposed on imports of chips manufactured abroad, none of this matters because Extropic is going to solve this problem?
Well, it still matters.
I mean, it matters to those people, right?
I think
But you could be the big winner in all of this, right?
we are definitely a disruption in all sorts of calculations. We still use metals, right? Like, for example, today I think it was just announced. You guys have to confirm this, but I think China is banning exports of like rare earth minerals to the U.S., which is kind of a nightmare scenario for chip making, right? And that affects any sort of chip you want to do, right? No matter how innovative you are. And this is something we were concerned about, that China has kind of secured the supply chains sort of before you get to the fab. You have metals, right, and rare earth minerals, and now they're cutting off sort of shipment to the U.S. So even if we are to reshore our fabs, then they've done a supply chain attack one layer deeper. And so I've seen this trend for the past 10 years. It's been kind of like positioning of who has control over AI chips. Because that's going to determine who has more intelligence, and who has more intelligence would win in a hot conflict, and arguably would also win in a just economic Cold War, which is really what's happening more or less right now. I would say we are in a Cold War, but definitely going to be disruptive in terms of what capabilities can you get versus what process node do you need access to. I think that's a safe thing to say at this point. And I think the government backing, picking winners and sort of, for example, putting tens of billions in Intel, kind of an old player that's struggling right now, is maybe not the best use of capital, right? And honestly, I think if the government just gave that money to VCs, and did a 20-year fund, and they were mandated to invest in sort of infrastructure. I think the free market and competition would do much better in allocating that capital towards innovation. But unfortunately, that's not what's being done. But we'll see. Now there's the Doge. There's the CHIPS Act money just sitting there, which could be misallocated, or it could be maybe more cleverly allocated. We'll see what they do with it. But definitely gonna keep my eye out for that. All that.
What do you say to the people your critics who say that what you are advocating here and building is actually a future where humans are obsolete? They don't matter anymore. I mean, this is one of the AI safety memes that gets passed around a lot. You've got the death sort of taking out every species to make room for the successor species. And that is sort of what you are not only arguing for, but building with your company by advocating this kind of unfettered AI development. Um, are they right that you're what you want is that you're okay with a post-human future?
I think that that's a classic caricature. They're What they don't understand is that right now there's very much a focus on anthropomorphic AI. There's a very anthropocentric focus to AI. We're just trying to quote unquote automate humans.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of forms of AI that are helpful to us in solving the big problems we face, like terraforming our planet, solving our energy crisis, understanding chemistry, understanding our own biology. Frankly, we barely understand anything about our biology. We just noted down some patterns and we have some rough prescriptions. It's extremely primitive, right? I think our we are sort of biological programs, right? Like DNA is our code, and I think there's this new frontier of understanding complex systems, including our biology, that's going to be unlocked by far better AI. And so
Mm.
even to augment humans and push us forward and understand and master our own biology, you need far more computational power. This is what 10 years of doing AI for physics has taught me, is we need far more compute power than people even imagine, far beyond even emulating a human brain, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're gunning for at
Mm-hmm.
Extropic, right? And and really, it's not just
This is kind of like, sorry, just to interrupt. This is kind of the Brian Johnson approach to things right now exemplifies this. We had him on the show, which we'll link below, but he's saying like his vision is to work with AI to optimize what goes into his body and his
100%.
brain to make him into some sort of, not immortal, but super long lived, like optimized being. And so that's kind of like the near term that you're laying
Yeah,
out here.
near and long term. I think
Mm,
biology is like an extremely complex system. It's going to require far more data and far more compute than we can even imagine. And people want to live longer. They want to live healthier lives. They want to have healthy offspring. So really, sort of EAC is sort of a meta culture, right? There's bioac, there's human accelerationism, there's AI accelerationism. You could accelerate all the things,
mm.
right? Like basically
There's
EAC was
Forbes.
trying to be non-prescriptive and which path forward, and that freaked people out. But like
Mm,
I'm personally all for acceleration of biology, and I think that well, fundamentally, Feynman cooked up quantum computers because he wanted to simulate nature at a quantum mechanical level. If you ever used folding at home, right, on folding at home is the software to fold proteins. You can run your
mhm,
computer very hot for like days, and then there could be hundreds of other computers in the world running for days to fold, like, to do the dynamics of one protein for like tens of nanoseconds, right?
mm,
And you realize how much compute power biology has and how much compute power we need to be able to predict it. And so for sort of powering the next generation AlphaFold, creating the training data, creating the simulation data, thermodynamic computers that are stochastic are really good at simulating other stochastic systems. So that includes molecular dynamics. So it's not just for AI,
mm.
it's actually going to help us simulate the world at a nanoscale much better and then create predictive models of that.
Yeah.
Um, so I think once we have human like AI, on GPUs and so on, I think people are going to be like, what's next? How do we make AI work for us? Right? How do we have AI improve our lives, improve everything about our world, and that's going to be sort of AI for physics, and that's really what we're trying to power. So I think there's huge upside to better understanding the world at all scales, so that we can perceive, predict, and control it. Of course, you can control if you centralize the capabilities of intelligence, then you give those people a lot of control over the world. But if everybody has better perception, prediction, and control of the world, I think we live in a better world overall. So that's what we're
Yeah.
we're trying to argue for. Yeah.
It's a fascinating and exciting future to imagine. We're going to bring the show to a close with our final question, which we ask everybody, which is, what is a question that you think more people should be asking?
Hmm. Um, yeah, that's a great question. I think how do we, well, because this is reason, I think how do we reimagine governance, right? In this
Mm.
era where we've seen sort of complex systems thinking, or self-adaptive complex systems thinking, bottom-up self-organization, you know, change how we organize ourselves and as a civilization through capitalism, change programming. We're trying to make it change culture and hardware. But how do we change governance in this era of AI so that from first principles we have optimal governance, right? Because you can't centralize too much power. There's a decay of information as you go up hierarchies, and at the same time, you want sort of fault tolerance and tight feedback loops that are fast. So how do we organize ourselves in this era where we have these new technologies that can have predictive models of the world, and there's huge new flows of information? One thesis is just make a big centralized AI, make a big centralized government, give it absolute power. And that's the future that's being painted by some, including kind of our political opponents, the EAs. They think it's the only path to AI safety. And to us, that's a dystopian nightmare. That's, P1980, P90 in 1984 is superior to PAI Doom, right? And instead, like we should be, examining how do we take inspiration from sort of these self-organizing systems and these algorithms to engineer governance structures from first principles. And that's why I've been supportive of some experiments, governance experiments of network states and so on. There's a first few experiments, but I think there should be far more because it's teaching us a lot about different governance schemes and how they could work. I think the United States needs to experiment again. I think there's a big opportunity now as we're refactoring our sort of legal code base, as we're sort of pruning the government down to reinvent how we organize ourselves. So I want people to start thinking about that far more because we're at a unique point in history where we have a chance to, refactor our legal tech stack for the United States and maybe secure hundreds of years of prosperity from this big change. And we're at this inflection point. And so, hopefully people think about that and implement the right policies.
Yeah, totally agree. And part of that equation is for these experiments in governance to figure out how to keep the bigger governments off their back so that they can continue the experiment. But maybe AI can help with that in some way as well. Guillaume, thank you very much for talking with us. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Just Asking Questions. We drop a new episode every Thursday, so if you want to support the work we do, please like and share this episode, subscribe to our new YouTube channel, and follow the show on your favorite podcasting app. See you next time.